Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host, and we have an interesting show for you tonight. We have Scott Deschaine. He's going to be talking about the possible living sky. Are UFOs organic? Could they be living creatures? Could some of them be? It's going to be fascinating, I think. And so I want to thank everyone that helps out with the show, supports the show. Anyone can do that. You can find that information on our website, podcastufo.com. We have a new blog. We have a guest blogger in Tasmania, and he wrote a blog about the UFO world and his thoughts on that, living there all his life down in Tasmania. So that is on our website as well. And let's see, I am in a new studio. I moved last week, and so I've noticed the internet has had a little bit of issue here. So I'm hoping it's not going to affect the show tonight. I'll try to get that worked out between now and next week, and fix anything that's going on with that if there are issues. And I think that's about all I want to talk about. I'm going to let Alejandro go from here. How you doing, Alejandro?
Good. How are you?
I'm exhausted, but I'm good.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, from all that moving. I don't know that I've ever heard of someone taking as long as you did. And I know that it wasn't because you were messing around. You were hauling stuff the entire time.
Yeah, some days from 6 in the morning until 1 the following morning. It was really,
Holy moly.
yeah. When you have a big place, you tend to put things
Uh-huh.
in places, and then you had no idea that you had things. So, and
Oh,
yeah,
I can
it's way
only
too much.
imagine it's hard enough to move from 1,500, 2,000 square foot place, but a place two to three times that, I can only imagine.
Yeah, yeah. I just want to put everything in a big pile and burn it. But anyway, so what's going on in the UFO world?
So UFOs, yeah, there's quite a bit going on. At least, there's a lot of news around, and a lot of people have seen this, and we've talked about this. In fact, we've been one of the few outlets to talk about this. But To the Stars Academy, of course, ran by Tom DeLonge, an organization looking into the UFOs and paranormal. Some of the other members are people in intelligence and scientists, and of course Lou Elizondo, who used to run the DoD project investigating UFOs. So there was an SEC filing that came out, and it's because they're a public corporation. They're kind of a new type of corporation where it's kind of a crowdfunding based type of thing where you can buy shares to be part of this company. Well, a filing came out that said they were 37,000 or $1 million in debt. And so people started assuming, and you saw all these videos popping up, especially with conspiracy people and stuff. Oh, To the Stars owes all this money. They're going under. This was just a big scam to steal money from people. There were even some people saying that they must have spent this $37 million, or no, they weren't saying they must have. They were saying this is what happened. They spent this $37 million building an alien technology spaceship, and now they don't want to share it with anybody, and that's where the money must have went and all of this sort of thing. Well, what's funny about that is if they had built a spaceship like that, it probably would have cost more than $37 million. But as you know, I've been trying to point out to people, if you look at that filing, it was for equity stock compensation. So it's kind of a paper thing. It's not real money. It's not money that they spent. And I'm not going to say I understand it, but it's kind of been on the internet. And of course, I've addressed it, and we've talked about it, I think, on the show. But it went big in the last couple of days, especially when Ars Technica wrote a story about it. And that got picked up by Mashable and some other news outlets. So it kind of got out there. But Ars Technica kind of took the perspective and the verbiage that you heard from kind of the conspiracy theories and from the social media out there. And obviously, the To the Stars people got a little upset. In particular, Tom DeLonge. He posted a couple things on social media saying, this guy got it all completely wrong, and they need to retract that. And that got deleted yesterday, but there's another response that's kind of a little more formal and explanatory that came out from To the Stars today. Now, I am not, and I've sought the help of some people who know about accounting and corporate accounting, but who've tried to explain it, and I know To the Stars tries to explain it here, but it's over my head, and I think it'll be over a lot of people's heads. But essentially what he's saying is that it's not real debt. I mean, what they've been doing, like a lot of early companies, they'll pay their people in stock. So a lot of these people are practically essentially volunteers, which isn't too surprising because, of course, if you look at Mutual UFO Network, any of these organizations out there, they're all volunteers. But these guys are getting paid in a stock so that if the company does well, at some point this stock will be worth something. And so that's what that number relates to, is actual stock. It's not money they owe or anything. Now, they didn't address part of that SEC filing, which does say something to the effect that this could be an issue for their viability going forward. In fact, it calls it a growing concern, and it says these factors raise doubt about the company's ability to continue as a going concern. So obviously, it's something that is, internally something they're working on, but it's not what it was. It's not debt like they said it was. And in fact, To the Stars has reached out to many of the news outlets who have posted corrections to their stories. Ars Technica, I guess, has not done that yet, but many other outlets have. So, it's not what it's been portrayed out there. And of course, a lot of people jumping the gun before they got information. And as we've said, we'll wait for more information. And it appears to be what we thought it was. It's not like, this huge debt like people are trying to make it out to be, nor have they built an alien spacecraft or anything like that. In fact, we know what they're up to because they're posting videos about what they're up to. They're up to, looking into these materials. And apparently they have some materials that they believe have been retrieved from UFOs or anomalous occurrences, which are showing some promise, apparently, that they are doing some scientific studies and have found some of this stuff to be genuinely anomalous. And I know over time, and I don't think it's going to be the too distant future, they want to share their findings. So it'll be great to see that information once it comes out. But of course, that sort of work that they're doing, the lab testing, while it's expensive, isn't millions and millions of dollars. And in fact, in this SEC filing, you can see those numbers. I mean, everything they're doing, all these numbers are there, and you can see that these operating costs have cost them, $100,000 or so dollars. So it's been expensive. But and that's what precludes this testing to happen in this field often, is that it is expensive. And, expensive for an average person is in the thousands to tens of thousands. The normal person out on this, volunteer can't afford to pay that to get this stuff analyzed. So it is, I feel, beneficial that they're doing this, and we'll see what happens with the material. At least we'll learn more about some of the materials out there that have been suspected to be anomalous. So that's some news that's out there because those stories have been running. And you know how it is with the news cycle. Once the wrong story gets out, that is the predominant story. And typically corrections, they either don't get out there or you never hear about them. So
that's the story that people remember and
right,
and fall back on. Now, so this was a public filing. Is that how this got out?
Exactly. It's a public filing. It's something that they have to do. This filing, let's see, was posted on June 30th, 2018. So it's been out there for a while. Before people kind of ran across it. But, of course, this is the Securities and Exchange Commission. And since they are a corporation that are dealing in shares, that's why they have to, follow the rules and regulations. And some of that is to disclose and to write these reports. So there is one actually from last year you can go find as well. But yeah, this was the latest update.
Now, when they do something like this, um, you said that Tom made some type of statement. Did he clear it all up and say, "Hey, everyone, everything's okay. Stop worrying" or anything? What was the gist
Essentially,
of what he wrote?
the gist was explaining. I guess to begin, this is kind of an introduction. We appreciate the professionalism in most media channels who have taken the steps to update their articles and inform their readers of their mistake. And gets into how essentially just saying this isn't debt like people keep saying. Like many other startups, we're paying our people in stock. And so this is a stockholder equity deficit number that looks like this big number that we owe, but it's not. If you look at the details, the notes, on that same SEC filing, you'll see more information about that. I've looked at those notes. I just don't understand accounting speak, so I don't get it. It's often like talking about multiple dimensions and the science behind that. That's one that's way over my head too. So so that's essentially what he was saying. He said, Tom DeLonge, that was from To the Stars. Tom DeLonge personally said, I want to mention that I appreciate, those who have reached out, and those journalists who have been correcting things. But that's about all they've said. So they didn't speak to that point of whether or not, the state of the company. I don't think that doesn't appear they want to make a comment on that as of yet. But I haven't reviewed all the corrections, and maybe one of those corrections will speak to that.
Okay, great. We have just a couple of minutes. Anything else?
I guess that's the big news that people will see out there right now. Otherwise, really, yeah, that's the biggest thing out there. Otherwise, I would say there's lots of news out there about Project Blue Book because of New York Comic Con a week or so ago, and those are some really neat stories out there. So I would recommend people take a look at that. Excitement's growing for this television show that'll be coming out January 1 about Project Blue Book and Dr. J. Allen Hynek.
Oh, it's January 1. Wow. So they're really promoting this ahead.
Yeah, I think it's January. I'm pretty sure it is. Now you're making me question. But
well, anyone can look that up. All they have to do is Google that.
It's coming out very soon is what we need to know.
Yeah, right. All right.
And January's coming up really quick. The holidays come. You know how it is. After Halloween, all of a sudden it's Thanksgiving, then it's Christmas, and you're like, whoa, where did those 3 months go?
About 3 or 4 days ago, I had to go to Home Depot for something. And I walked in the door, and it was Santa Claus and Christmas trees. And it's October.
Oh, my gosh, you're kidding.
No, I took a picture of it and put it on Facebook. And it's like, I was joking with the girl there. I said, is this for next year? You're doing it earlier and earlier all the time. Anyway, crazy.
I mean, it's Halloween. We need our costumes still.
Yeah, I know. Well, anyway. All right. Well, thanks, Alejandro. And
all right. Thank you.
We'll be talking next week. And everyone, don't forget to check out Alejandro's live stream show, especially you people that like to watch on YouTube now. It's every Thursday. And go ahead, give them the pitch on that.
Sure. It's called UFOs Seriously. It's every Thursday at 6 p.m. Arizona time, which is currently aligned with Pacific. And yep, you can just go to the Open Minds TV YouTube channel and go check it out there.
Yeah, and you won't be aligned too much longer. We go into we change in daylight savings time fairly soon, I think.
Oh, we do. Yeah, I always forget when that is.
I do too.
Yeah, so
we'll change
and
yeah.
Yeah,
Arizona doesn't.
And that's what's nice about Arizona. We don't do that, but it still causes trouble because everybody else does. But, of course, on there, you'll be able to ask questions live, and I try to answer questions, and then I go over all of the UFO news for the week, of course, which you can see at openminds.tv.
Excellent. All right, Alejandro, talk to you next week.
All right, talk to you next week. Have a great show.
All right, thank you. So our guest this evening is Scott Deschaine, and he has a couple of books, The Sky is Alive, The Living Sky, and we're going to be talking about all that and so much more Fascinating topic. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you for having me.
Yes, and we have in the background, you have some posters going. When we pop up on full screen, we'll be able to show the people watching YouTube that. I thought this was fascinating because I remember what your subject is, because I've watched a video one time. I remember it clearly. It looked like a jellyfish, and it looked like something living. And a few people have talked about experiences where they were thinking things were alive. That's a whole nother subject I'll talk to you about as we get into it a little bit more. But what caused you to look into this, and also what made you take this approach that I don't think anyone else has ever taken?
Well, actually, it's not my idea totally. I've taken it sort of some logical conclusions or some logical next steps. But I'm sure a lot of folks who are interested in UFOs are familiar with the name Kenneth Arnold. You know, he's the gentleman whose sighting in 1947 sparked the whole term flying saucer. Well, he studied UFOs the rest of his life, and he came to the conclusion that they were some kind of natural flora or fauna of the atmosphere, that they were living things. And it's kind of a mystery to me why more people don't pay attention. Everybody sort of lionizes Kenneth Arnold, but nobody pays attention to those conclusions that he had. I know there's been interviews with his daughter where she talks about some of his conclusions, but he talked to pilots, many pilots during his research, during his study of UFOs, and a lot of them told him stories of lifelike UFOs that are approaching planes. So what you described earlier, people saying, "Oh, it looked like a jellyfish. Oh, it moved," and that's a very common thing. In fact, that's what sort of led me into that whole area of study, looking at, once we started finding that you can have visual evidence of UFOs. I mean, I've always been fascinated by scary stories, and once we started having videotapes and DVDs, I decided to look closely at a lot of the UFO evidence. So you had people who didn't have access to a camera before, all of a sudden recording these things. And now everybody with a phone has a camera. So all of a sudden you're seeing, thousands and thousands and thousands of recordings of these objects. And you look at them, and so many of them, well, first of all, as I'm sure you're well aware, most of them are blurry or indistinct, or you can't tell what it is. But the few where they are clear, they don't really look like mechanical craft, but a lot of them look like what we call, the kind of organisms that we see living in Earth's oceans. And that sort of started me down that avenue, is considering the possibility that our atmosphere might be a habitat that's similar to Earth's oceans. And the more I've looked, the more I've found. It's just a fascinating topic, and there's all kinds of evidence out there, all kinds of visual evidence, and the best thing about it is that it provides a clear path for study going forward. We're not just looking at things in the past and saying, "Oh, what was it?" and arguing about what it was. There's actually different specific ways we can go forward and study this and try and find out if this is really a provable hypothesis.
Well, a couple of things I've thought of in this whole topic of yours, and one of them is, are these things actually supposed to be floating, or how do they maintain, weightlessness, less than air, as they say, how and then navigate and all that?
That's a good question. A lot of people ask that. They go, how do they stay up? Why don't they just fall out of the sky? And to really understand the topic, one of the reasons that it's kind of simple, but it's kind of revolutionary in a lot of ways. But one of the challenges to understanding the topic is you have to understand several different things. First, you have to think of the atmosphere. You have to understand a little bit about Earth's atmosphere. And then you have to understand a little bit about the UFO problem, what we see with the question of UFOs, why are, the whole nature of the phenomena. And then is where you take sort of a left turn, and you have to look at the type of organisms that we find in Earth's other fluid environment, the ocean. But let's start with the atmosphere. We think of the atmosphere I heard somebody once say that goldfish don't know what water is because they swim in it all the time. Now, we don't think of the atmosphere as a habitat because we just take it for granted. But it's this giant environment. It's this, vaporous cloud that surrounds the planet. It's huge. It has 5 million times more volume than Earth's oceans. And we tend to think of it as just empty space, but it's not. There's huge amounts of water and minerals and energy just coursing through the atmosphere on a scale we can't even imagine. So closer to the Earth, the atmosphere is more dense, and as we rise higher, it gets less dense until at the edge of space, there's not really a hard line there. It's just kind of some kind of transfer back and forth between the edge of space and Earth's atmosphere. So things moving through the atmosphere don't have to float. They just have to be less dense than what's immediately below them. So it's like asking, why don't fish just sink to the bottom of the ocean? Well, they maintain their buoyancy through that fluid environment. And that's what I'm proposing, is that the types of organisms that we seem to see in the atmosphere are the kind that can maintain that sort of buoyancy.
Now, I understand you just said that there's 5 million times more volume in the atmosphere than all the oceans. But
right.
Don't you, it seems to me that if there was actually something up there, wouldn't it be detected more often, or is it just that it's so vast? Is it, all kinds of things come to mind. How do these things breed? Where do they hang out for the most part? What do they eat? Do they eat birds? No, all that.
Well, that's a good question. Those are great questions. And part of it comes down to another challenge about this hypothesis is accepting. Humans tend to think that we're the grand poobah of the food chain. We're at the top of the food chain. But if you think of our planet's environment and the different habitats that are there, it's 2/3, 3/4 of the planet is oceans. We can't live in the oceans. Enveloping the whole planet or the atmosphere. We can't live in the atmosphere. Our habitat is just this tiny skin on the surface of the land. We can't live below the surface of the land. We live on the surface of the land. So if you think about our perspective, that's our perspective, right on the surface of the Earth. Now, if you think in the past, we've only been having powered air flight for a little over 100 years. So we tend to think that we understand what's up there, but we really don't. Now, there's a possibility that there is an entire realm of life that's too fast, too smart, and possibly too indistinct, too good at disguising itself for us to perceive. And you ask, why don't we see them all the time? Well, we do. As you're aware, one of the mysteries of the UFO phenomena is how many people see them, and people see them all the time. And that was, to me, one of the bits of kind of evidence that sort of cemented in my mind that this was a real possibility. I said, okay, let's test this hypothesis. If these are living creatures, if they're up in the atmosphere, wouldn't people see them? And I thought, well, what's the most credible evidence that we can find? I said, let's go look at the NASA program. Let's see what the astronauts have seen. Let's go look at what the shuttle and the space station have recorded. And what I found just boggled my mind. You're probably aware of some of the footage that's out there, some of the shuttle footage that's out there that's been reported as UFO sightings and unexplained objects. But if you look at these things, they are just hours and hours and hours of unexplained objects moving through the atmosphere.
Are you talking about from the capsule windows? No, we actually have to go to break here, so I'm going to have to.
Okay.
We'll have to come back to this, but so let's just come back to this. I'm going to ask the question: are these things that they have filmed right outside the window, basically? And
okay.
So hang in there, everyone. We're going to go to break right now, and we are on KGRA Radio, and this is Martin Willis. My guest is Scott Deschaine, and we'll be right back.
All right, guys, we just got just over 4 minutes in this break.
Got it. Okay, thank you. So we'll go back to that looking out the window of a capsule or whatever it is, space station or all that.
Yeah, sounds great.
Yeah. So anyway, you actually, I didn't ask this in the main part of the show, but what actually got you interested in the topic of UFOs to begin with?
Well, my brother used to read me. I don't know if you remember Frank Edwards, Stranger Than
Oh, yeah.
Science. Do you remember those books?
Yeah, yeah.
He used to read those to my sister and my brother and I, and scare the pants off of us. And so, of course, I wanted to find out, well, what's really going on, And then, so you can blame Frank Edwards. And then, of course, I started researching reading the greats like John Keel and Ivan Sanderson. And in fact, Ivan Sanderson wrote a whole book postulating that UFOs might be living creatures. So, like I said, it's not my original idea. My idea is just to say, oh, they're kind of similar to the organisms. It's not a stretch of the imagination to think they might be very similar to the organisms we find in the oceans. But yeah, that's the whole idea, the scary story aspect of it is what got me interested in it.
And have you explored other topics as well? You've written other books?
Well, yeah, my career it was actually producing educational booklets for different organizations. So that's one of the things that sort of led me into this area as well. I did a lot of work for conservation agencies where I studied living things, habitats, natural resources, how all those things interacted to create an environment to make life possible. And so it got me thinking about the resources in the atmosphere. And that's sort of, I thought, well, gosh, you got all these resources in the atmosphere for habitat. I wonder what's there. And sure enough, everywhere we look, we find more things. And that's something we can talk about, too, is some of the areas in the atmosphere where we find things that seem to look like living things.
Yeah, I've heard scientists say that the atmosphere around Earth is like the skin of an apple. It's not.
Right.
It's not, in comparison to the Earth, we don't have a lot of it.
Right, and that's it's kind of, in fact, it's one of the things that's kind of important about why we need to study this is because, if these things, we can talk when we get back to from the break. We can talk some about sprites. I don't know if you've heard anything about those.
Yeah, I've watched a documentary on that before. Reverse lightning actually goes up.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, they hold on. I was one of my contacts sent me something recently about an astronaut who was, I think it was STS Shuttle Mission 115, where he just was interviewed by someone, and he said that the things that they saw there looked like they were organic, and that was interesting because for an astronaut to say that was kind of that's a big deal.
Right.
Yeah.
There's been a few that have said some pretty interesting things.
And according, I don't know, you're familiar with Martin Stubbs, the fellow that recorded a lot of this footage?
No.
He was a Canadian public access television director, and in the early days, a lot of the shuttle feeds down from the shuttle, they were unsecured, and so he was there with the public access television station in Canada, and he would just record, just keep changing the tapes out, recording all the stuff from the shuttle.
Hang on just a minute. I think we're about ready to go back.
Great. Okay.
Race, are we ready to go back?
Indeed.
All right.
All right, here we go. In 5, 4, 3, 2.
All right, welcome back. This is Martin Willis. My guest is Scott Deschaine. And Scott, we were talking just before the break about what people had been filming outside of the window of NASA spacecraft, or actually the space station as well, I believe. But if correct me if I'm wrong. But a lot of the footage, are you talking about this footage that people caught that was transmitted, or that someone can actually get the files now?
Oh yeah, there's a whole range of different pieces of footage that have been caught over the years of the decades of exploration. As a matter of fact, you don't have to look very far to find this evidence. The first time we put a man into orbit, John Glenn, he reported the famous Firefly Incident, where he saw these objects, these luminous particles, all around his capsule as he moved there through, around the planet. And he saw them near dawn each time as he came into the dawn area of the atmosphere. And after that, if you think about the astronauts orbiting the planet, I mean, their first impulse, their first concern is safety, to do everything correct so they can get back down safely. So when we had a chance to remain in orbit for longer times with the space station and during the shuttle program, they had a little more time to focus on the things that were outside the craft. And when they started looking outside the craft, they actually recorded some amazing stuff. Some of it was by design, but some of it was by accident. They used some different cameras that would reveal things that weren't visible to the naked eye. For example, the shuttle mission 39 they call them STS 39 in 1991. They used a type of camera called Cirrus, which is an acronym for a camera that allowed them to look into the infrared spectrum. Well, when they trailed it, when they pointed it outside, they saw this whole swarm of things moving by the camera. They looked like pulsing squid, which are one of the types of organisms that are very prominent in Earth's oceans, and they're perfectly suited for moving in a fluid environment. And they've also been reported flying. So we know that squid fly, and we know they come out of the water, and we know that some of them are bigger than we even imagine. Now, is it a big stretch to think that some of them move up through the atmosphere? Well, this particular piece of footage from STS-39 actually shows what seemed to be a swarm of these things moving by the capsules. They pulse and they move, they change direction as they're going by. That's just one example. There's also some very famous examples. There was a gentleman in Canada named Martin Stubbs, who was a public access television program manager, who used to record the satellite downlink from the space shuttle. That was before it was secured. And he recorded hours and hours and hours of footage. The guy is a hero because a lot of this stuff would have just been lost to obscurity otherwise. And one of the most famous things that he recorded was Space Shuttle Mission 75, STS-75, where there was the so-called Tether Incident. And that was one thing when I started looking for evidence. Have you seen that video?
Oh, yes,
have you seen that footage?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's mind-boggling. It's a piece of history. And when I first saw that, it was just like, it was like looking through a microscope for the first time. And it's interesting. I've shown that to different scientists. And, scientists are actually pretty skeptical. But when you show them this actual footage taken by the astronauts, I mean, a lot of them say they look like living things. I have an interview on my website. I have a website and a YouTube channel called The Living Sky, thelivingsky.com, and the YouTube channel is The Living Sky. I have an interview with a scientist who studies freshwater jellyfish. I didn't even know there were such things, but apparently in fresh bodies of fresh water around the United States and around the world, millions of jellyfish will sometimes appear. And I kept asking him, well, where are they coming from? Where are they coming? And he said, well, some people think they move through the sky. So I said, okay, you're saying jellyfish might move through the sky. You want to take a look at some of this NASA footage. So I showed it to this jellyfish expert, and he's going, they look like jellyfish. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so I have a question I'm going to,
Sure.
it just came to mind here. What happens when, say, well, first of all, we haven't talked about the size of these creatures, if they are creatures, but they must be massive if so. Okay, so what happens when one dies? Does its carcass just float in space and disappear, or does it ever crash land?
That's a great question. Well, the interesting thing, first let's go, we talked about the atmosphere a little bit. let's go then and look at the UFO mystery, and then we'll go back. I'm going to circle back to the whole idea of the invertebrates.
Okay.
Okay. We know that there's massive amounts of water moving through the atmosphere. The jet stream, somebody calculated there's more water moving through the sky in the jet stream than there is moving in the Amazon River. Somebody calculated there's more water moving through the air over the United States than in all the rivers combined. So there's a huge amount of water up there. And the big question about UFOs is one of the things that is mysterious that people see so many of them. There's so many different kinds that people report, but yet they keep seeing them again and again and again, and they see them in large numbers. They see them in a lot of different places. So the two different types of UFOs that people seem to report most are the disc shape or the saucer shape, and the cigar shape or the rocket shape. And those parallel two of the most successful types of organisms in the oceans, the jellyfish and the squid. And both of those are perfectly suited for living in a fluid environment. The jellyfish is made up mostly of the environment in which it lives. So in the water, it's mostly water. It's just very little organic matter in addition to the water. The squid is like a perfect living jet. It can control its own buoyancy. It's a great predator, and it can camouflage itself. It not only is bioluminescent, but it can camouflage itself, even to the extent that it can make one side of itself one color and the other side another color. Now, an invertebrate isn't limited by its skeleton, so they do grow to huge sizes. We know in the ocean that some of the largest organisms are jellyfish and squid. In fact, there have been some reports of monster jellyfish, and one in the Indian Ocean almost swallowed a steamer. There was a storm, and the bow of the ship went under the water. When it came up, it was fouled in a jellyfish. And they said the slime was 6 feet deep on the ship, on the deck of the ship, and they had to call another ship to spray boiling water on it to get it off. One man died. One sailor died. So we know that there's huge jellyfish in the ocean. Now, if we look in the atmosphere, and again, the thing about this is I'm not saying this is the case. I'm just saying this is a hypothesis. This is something that is worthy of further study. If we think that there are organisms moving through the atmosphere like jellyfish, they may be composed mostly of water and water vapor. So when they do die, it's like a jellyfish on the beach. When they come on the beach, you can watch, and almost as you watch, they sublimate. The water just evaporates until there's nothing there. So there's a possibility that some of these organisms, as they die and decompose, they may just either sublimate, turn back into vapor, or perhaps they actually deposit, rain or water vapor at the lower levels of the atmosphere. In the ocean, they talk about a constant snow falling of decayed matter at the bottom of the ocean as organisms on the higher level decay, and it eventually wafts its way down to the very bottom of the ocean as snow. Now, we're living at the bottom of an ocean of air. Who's to say what's going on up there doesn't affect us down here and affect our weather and our climate? So, but only further study is going to prove if that's true or not.
Yeah. And you would also think that there are changes in the atmosphere. The ozone, for one. It seems like if there were actually living things up there that we haven't detected or haven't seen, or science at least hasn't seen. I mean, there has been no actual science on this, has there, as far as you know?
Well, that's the question. I don't think there is. And it's a puzzle to me. I've talked to a lot of different scientists, and I've tried to spark an interest in further study of this. And in fact, one of my goals is to try and get younger people who might be interested in the mystery of UFOs and in science to look at this as a possibility. Because with the technology we have now, I predict it's just a matter of time until we use the right tools and look up there. We're going to find living things. There are so many possible lifelike phenomena at almost every level of the atmosphere where we look. Now, there is a science, and this is it's kind of easy to label things. There is a science called Aero Biology. And, we have marine biology and there's Aero Biology. And Aero Biology was initially formed to study the spread of diseases in hospitals as, germs move through the different wards. And now it studies the spread of pests and insects, spores moving through the atmosphere, rising up, moving and infecting crops and stuff. But as far as I can tell, nobody is studying the possibility of megafauna, giant organisms moving through the atmosphere. Now, one of the things that you mentioned, Martin, before was the size of these organisms, the potential size of these organisms. Jellyfish have an amazingly complex life cycle. They reproduce sexually and asexually. They can have tiny eggs and tiny larval forms, and then when they can reproduce asexually, they can keep budding off medusa, which are the traditional bell-shaped jellyfish that we think of. And when those bud off, they mature and become sexually mature, but they can keep growing and growing and growing. And it's kind of similar to what we see with a lot of UFO reports. We see many different shapes and many different sizes. Now, another area that really kind of convinced me I was going down the right path here was when we look at habitats. When we're looking for living things, we look at where habitats overlap. We call it the edge effect. So, for example, an organism might live at the edge of a forest and the edge of a field, or the edge of the ocean and the edge of the shore. That's where we find a lot of living things because they can access the resources from both of those habitats. They go back and forth and get both of those sets of resources. So I said, well, let's look in the sky, and where's an edge in the sky? And I said, what about the tops of thunderstorms? Because at any given moment, there are 200 massive thunderstorms moving around the planet all the time. And I said, what are they finding above thunderstorms? Well, in the past 30 years, we've just started looking above the tops of thunderstorms, and we've found these phenomena which scientists call sprites. And initially, they thought that these were just electrical phenomena. They thought that they were a kind of lightning. But as we look further, when scientists first found these, they started saying, oh, they look like giant jellyfish. They used the term, it's a new aerial bestiary. It's a whole set of new organisms that we've seen up there. But the problem that a lot of people run up against is these things are 45 to 100 miles tall. And they live above the tops of thunderstorms. If you see pictures of these things, you'll see little thunderstorms along the bottom, and you know how big thunderstorms are, and here are the sprites towering above them. So the question is, are those actually living things? Now, they since have found that the same sprites persist. We perceive them for up to 30 minutes. So it doesn't sound like strictly an electrical phenomena. We found that they produce waves, gravitational waves, and again, scientists have said it's like this something enormous swimming in the atmosphere, and they've also recorded ultrasound, infrasound, huge waves, again as if something enormous was swimming in the atmosphere. Now, the more we look up there, the more of these sprites we find. As a matter of fact, one of the last shuttle missions, Shuttle Columbia, the one that crashed, their last missions was studying sprites in the atmosphere, and they found that sprites are much more numerous than anybody first thought. So we have no idea how many of these things are up there. And the problem that we have is we're small and they're huge. How would we even begin to get a look at those? So that we're going to have to change our perspective to truly study that phenomena to see if they are living things up there.
Now, what about say satellites and other observational equipment? I know we've had atmospheric satellites up there studying, the atmosphere. It seems like there would. What I'm getting at, it seems like there's not really detection, and I wonder what you have to say about that.
Actually, there is a lot of detection, and I think it's not so much a matter of detection, but it's a matter of attitude, and nobody's nobody's actually looking at it, looking for life forms. We've seen repeatedly, from the International Space Station, we've seen a lot of different objects recorded around the space station. But what I would love to see is someone actually putting a camera outside to look for living things that might pass by the space station. As a matter of fact, I think it would be very simple to set up some kind of collection device to actually, record and to actually sort of corral and record in detail any kind of object that might move by there. I mean, there's some fascinating footage. There are dozens and dozens of pieces of footage of objects moving by the space station. But one of the problems is, when you're looking out the window, something moves by quickly. You only get a few seconds to record something. Some of the best footage is when the shuttles were approaching the space station. They would actually see objects moving around the space station, like hovering around it. And as a matter of fact, there's one amazing clip where the shuttle is approaching the space station to dock, and you're looking at it, and you're looking at all the different objects moving around it, and then you notice that there's one huge one that's just kind of moving along the side of the space station, like it's looking in the window. So I predict, like I said, if you look at some of the amazing stuff that's going on now, is some of the infrared night vision footage that's gone out there. Have you looked at any of those?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
I know that we see in a very small spectrum of. I don't know what the percentages are, but I know that we only see a certain amount with our eyes, basically, and there's so much more that can be going on that we can't see. So when you're talking about infrared, that's a little more the spectrum or a different one part of it.
Right. So there's the detection. I mean, people are seeing. If you look, you can look until your eyes grow tired at all the objects that people have recorded with some of the night vision cameras that are out there. It's there's an amazing amount of stuff. Also, people have recorded sprites. Whenever people look at them and look for them, they find them above the tops of thunderstorms. I mean, they can be perceived, they can be detected, and they can be photographed. But nobody's really hunting them like a biologist trying to say, well, is this a living thing? They're looking at them as lightning, as an atmospheric phenomena. And I've talked to some scientists who've studied sprites, and it's interesting because there's a divide. Some of them go, you're nuts, you're out of your mind. And some of them go, that's pretty interesting. So,
yeah, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, because I've heard the images that they have filmed. There was one particular scene, and you probably have seen it, where it looks almost like a donut going by the window, almost like it's alive.
Right.
Yeah, you know the one I'm talking about. But
yes.
The supposed answer was that was dust. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I think people are quick to rush to an answer. It's almost as if we feel comfortable when we have an answer to something. Mm-hmm. And this is where I think it's important. I think a lot of times in the study of UFOs, people get caught up in arguing about what happened and looking at things and saying, well, what was it this, was it that, and arguing about possible explanations. And that's why I think it's important that we move forward with the hypothesis and test the hypothesis. Let's take some of the best equipment that we have and go to some of these likely habitats in the atmosphere and look at them like hunters, like biologists, and say, okay, let's see if we can record these things. Let's see if we can get a really close look, not some blurry thing from afar where you caught somebody by surprise. I mean, there are numerous unexplained luminous atmospheric phenomena that occur regularly around the planet. And some of them are so regular, they have festivals and parties with them. But nobody's looking at them like a biologist. So, if we go there and instead of arguing about something in the past, let's see if we can get some irrefutable evidence and see if we can possibly explain some of these things.
Okay.
One scientist.
Go ahead.
One scientist, William Corliss, was a former NASA engineer who did a great series of books about unexplained phenomena. And I talked to him about this possibility. And he came up with, he said, you'll need a body.
Yeah. Yes. I've been told things like that before. That's what you
Right,
need for evidence.
right.
We're going to be going to a break in a few minutes. So just
Okay.
I want to tell you the story. First of all, I want to tell the people in chat if anyone has a question there for our guest during the chat, I will read him the questions off while we go on break. Um, Something I just thought of, should have tried a long time ago, but because I can't watch the chat during the show when I'm doing the show with you. And so this will give the people an opportunity now to post some questions for you. I want to talk, we have 3 minutes. I want to tell you of a longtime supporter of the show very early on. He listens to every show. He wanted me to tell you about his UFO sighting that he had back in 1990. He just couldn't believe his eyes because it looked like, I don't know what you want to call them, a herd of dolphins. It looked like dolphins swimming, a whole bunch of them.
Wow.
And
Oh,
it
that's
was pretty
amazing.
bizarre.
Well, that's one thing that is important about trying to explain this is because people see these things, and you're aware of this. It baffles people, and they get confused. And some people, they really want an answer, and sometimes people go down these avenues where they don't find. They think they're crazy. They don't find some kind of peace with what they've seen. And if we can somehow prove that these things are, natural, not they're amazing, but natural, they're amazing nonetheless, then it maybe will let people feel like, they're not out of their minds and they've seen something that's, totally natural. But that is one of the things that a lot of people report is these groups, and that's in fact one of the things they have in common with marine invertebrates. They have group behavior. They move together and they interact with each other. And that's reported and is recorded in a lot of evidence.
Going back to Kenneth Arnold,
Right,
the grouping of 9 or whatever it was. I can't
right,
remember how many he saw.
right.
One thing I did would have mentioned to you, you mentioned the 2 different types of shapes that people seeing. Well, now it seems one of the majority of sightings are triangle UFOs.
Right.
And, the only thing I can think of that is like a manta ray or stingray or something. If you
Well,
want to go like biological.
yeah, that puzzled me too until I started. I actually read an article about the bioluminescent organs in squid, and that's one of the things that marine invertebrates have. They're bioluminescent. They produce their own light in many different ways. In fact, I read an estimate that 90% of marine life is bioluminescent. And in this particular study of squid, they showed that in the front of a lot of the squid, there was a triangle-shaped light-producing organ. It had 1, 2, 3 different light-producing organs. So I don't know. That's not proof, but it's a possibility that these things hover and produce light. It's just it's a possibility because that triangle shape was puzzling me too.
Well, the thing about the light, you mentioned that, and a lot of people have talked about a light that they see on a UFO as different than a normal light.
That's right.
You do hear a lot about, and so maybe it is, what is it called, bioluminous?
Bioluminescence, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's living light.
Right.
It's
Like,
produced in many different ways, and
yeah.
some organisms can produce it through a chemical reaction, and some of them actually have symbiotic bacteria that live within these light-producing organs that they use to produce light. It's
How about
fascinating.
that? Really
Yeah,
is. Okay,
yeah.
well, we're ready to go on break. We'll go back on a different topic right after the break. This is Martin Willis. My guest is Scott Deschaine. We're on KGR Radio, and we'll be right back right after these messages.
All right, brother. We are in the clear, and we've got 4 minutes, just over 4 minutes in this break.
All right, thank you. All right, so I'm going to ask you a couple of questions that people have been posting.
Great. Martin, I'm not bending your ear too much, am I?
Oh no, not at all. And also,
Okay.
I'm going to open up the phone line. No, this is interesting. Does Scott
Great,
have any
okay.
thoughts about how they get here, travel from A, B, or through dimensions? There's a few questions.
Okay.
Do you think they were always here, or do you think they came from somewhere else?
That's another good question. Are you asking me now, or?
Oh, yeah. That's a question.
Well, I think, if you read about some of the speculation about life on other planets, Carl Sagan and Arthur C. Clarke speculated that, we might find life on Jupiter and on Europa, Saturn's moon Europa. And they speculated it might be like giant jellyfish, gas-filled, fluid-filled organisms. And we like to draw lines as humans and say, oh, here's the ocean, and here's the atmosphere, and here's space. But there's not really a hard line. Things are moving, they're interchanging all the time. Things are moving between those different realms all the time. We see at the surface of the ocean, there's not really a hard line. It's more like an interface. Things move in and out. Molecules of water and organisms go in and out of the ocean all the time. So I think that Earth is probably regularly seeded by different organisms that hit the atmosphere, and I don't know. There's probably a number of different ways that they're dispersed, but I think when a certain number of them find a hospitable habitat in Earth's atmosphere, and they blossom. That's why sometimes we see, these huge swarms of UFOs. They call them armadas or flotillas or flaps, where sometimes there's a lot of them. I think it's just like a red tide in the ocean. When you see a group of organisms, especially invertebrates, they'll lay in a dormant state. There'll be millions of like tiny jellyfish in like a dormant state, just ready to go. And then when the conditions are right, when the water gets warm and everything's right, they just boom, they mature. And that's why we sometimes see them appear by the millions. And I think that might be what's happening, at the edge of space, that sometimes we see. And I know there was a scientist named Louis Frank who was studying the atmosphere, and he started to see what he thought were things of water coming into the atmosphere. And he postulated that there were mini comets, watery comets hitting the atmosphere.
Okay, we're ready to go back. Sorry.
Okay, sorry, I'm bending your ear again.
No. It's a little less than 4 minutes, but
okay.
Okay, we're ready.
Okay, we're ready to go. Bumper music is just now rolling.
Yep.
Martin.
Sounds good.
Okay. Scott, you all set?
Yes, sir.
All right, here we go. In 5, 4, 3, 2.
All right, everyone, we're back. This is Martin Willis. My guest is Scott Deschaine. And Scott, we had some questions emailed in from Kerry. He writes some good questions. And so I have not even looked at them. I've been pretty busy, so let me just read this one, the first one. What are your thoughts on conscious connection to UFOs? I've often heard that individuals get an overwhelming feeling to look up or step outside, which often leads to a sighting of a craft at that moment.
That's an interesting question. I can't begin to speculate on that, but I do know that there are times where people have sensed that there was something in their area above them and looked up and seen a UFO. Now, this kind of brings up another area. I don't know. There's several different UFO videos, and they're just I've literally looked at thousands and thousands of these, but there are several of them where it appears that the object, if it is a living creature, seems to be looking at us as much as we are looking at it. So I don't know if we can somehow, sometimes you're in a theater and you turn around and you look and somebody's looking right at you. I don't know if we can sense that we're being watched and look up and see them, or if it's something more. But this kind of brings up another point, which is jellyfish. The body that we see of some jellyfish is the compact, dense body. It's just part of their body, and they have a trailing mass of tentacles that may extend many times beyond their body, the main body length. And we see that with a lot of recorded UFOs with photographs and videos. We see trailing tails or tentacles. People describe them like badminton birdies or parachutes or ice cream cones. And I would urge people, if they are near a UFO, I mean, these organisms, some of them can be venomous and toxic. So when we see some of the physical effects on people of UFOs, they're almost exactly parallel the effects that people have from being exposed to invertebrate toxins. So if you see a UFO, I would advise not going anywhere near it and trying to seek cover.
Really? Wow. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
No. Well, you've heard many of the reports of people who have been exposed to UFOs, close encounters. A lot of people have the eye irritation, the skin irritation, sometimes the long-term neurological and physical effects. And like I said, they've almost exactly parallel the effects of invertebrate toxin. Invertebrates have some of the most toxic substances that they use to hunt. And that sort of, it leads into another area of, when you look into, what if you play what if, that leads into a whole nother area. Well, if there is this whole realm of life above us, could some of them be predators? And you think, well, if you saw predators, if they're predators, you might see things like, cattle mutilations or David Paulides' missing 411. And so there seems to be, that kind of evidence too in that area, which is kind of a disturbing area to think about. But
Right. I don't even know if I've told you this, but we do take calls, and
okay,
so we're going to post the call number up there now. If anyone would like to call in, or if you're over on KGRA radio and you want to hear write this down. The call-in number is 603-967-4030. And you're welcome to call in and ask our guest a question. Someone named Todd in chat said he wanted to call in, so the lines are open. Let
me go ahead, Martin. I'm sorry.
No.
Well, I wanted to share one experience about bioluminescence that kind of might point to the possibility that some of these organisms, some of the objects that we see might be bioluminescent organisms. Many levels of the atmosphere. If you think of the ocean, the ocean of air as an environment, you think where would be good habitat niches for organisms to live. And you think, okay, at the bottom of the ocean, there's like crevices, there's faults, there's caves. What do we see around those things? And we see a lot of the places around the Earth are, mystery lights, earthquake lights, spook lights. And so those are areas of promising research that we can study those while we're actually on the ground. I went out with the Travel Channel show America Declassified to Marfa, Texas, to study the Marfa lights out there. And those are a recurring phenomena. You see them all different times of the year, these mysterious lights moving around the desert plains out there. And we went out there with a FLIR camera, the forward-looking infrared, this big van that can see people at nighttime 8 miles away. It can see them out in the desert. And we had some, former military guys that were running that, and they were very seasoned vets about, using this equipment. And within hours of being there, we saw these unexplained lights that were, in the middle of the desert where nothing was out there. And they produced a visible light signature. You could see them with the highly sensitive visible lights, but they didn't show up on the FLIR, which measures heat. So they didn't produce heat, but they produced light. Now, the only form of light that we know of that produces light without heat is bioluminescence.
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah. So it's not proof that there are bioluminescents, but because an organism uses energy to produce that light, and it has to be very efficient about producing that light. So it's not proof, but it's definitely shows that there's further possibilities of study.
Great. We have a call. Caller, your first name, where are you calling from?
This is Todd from Richmond, Virginia.
Did you say Scott?
Todd.
Oh, Todd. Yeah, in the chat room. Yeah, your connection, phone connection is not perfect. So try to talk clearly if you would. You have a question for our guest?
Sure. I've got, first I got kind of an observation about what we were talking about. Then I have a question for kind of both you guys. It's more pertaining to like current events and get your thoughts on it. First, the sprites, from what I've seen, what I've heard, the saw a documentary on it. The electrical power, they're a lot stronger than like a normal light vehicle. And they actually, the strength electricity in them is so strong that it actually damages the ionosphere and like creates pockets where it allows like, cosmic radiation from the sun in there, and scientists study it, which I think is interesting. The second thing is like being organic and traveling through space. One thing that hydrogen is one of the most common elements in the interstellar space, so they possibly could use that for fuel or consumption.
Right.
That was kind of my statement.
Well, if you think too, a lot of these invertebrates, they enter a form in their life cycle when they're kind of in stasis. They go into a cyst form, and it's incredibly durable. This one jellyfish scientist told me they tried to kill these cysts. They radiated them, they froze them, and they couldn't kill them. They'd take them after 10 years being frozen. They'd put them back in water, and they'd go boom. They just come back to life. So, if these kind of organisms do move through, vast reaches of space, and they're in this kind of static form.
Hibernation.
Right. And then when they hit, the warm, moist atmosphere of our planet or some other planet, they might all of a sudden, blossom into life. And we see that with UFOs, that kind of activity where we see a swarm or a flotilla or an armada of UFOs. When they reach the right, it's like all of a sudden they go boom and just appear out of nowhere.
All right. Well, Todd, hey, thank you for the call.
Yeah, I got one quick thing I want to add.
Oh, sure, yeah. Go ahead.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So it's kind of relating to current events. I drive a tractor trailer, and I've been currently, which is what I'm doing right now, delivering water for FEMA down to Florida. Oh. So everybody talks about, 0-point energy and disclosure, and, they got this, nobody, the big oil industry wouldn't want to give up their monopoly, and everybody could go off the grid and whatnot. So my thoughts were, kind of doing what I'm doing right now, kind of got me thinking. I'm like, the insurance industry, while probably not as big as the oil industry, but it's a pretty big industry. And if they do have 0-point energy, and if everybody got it, because everybody talks about contributing to global warming, and we all know fossil fuels do that. The damage that these hurricanes and typhoons and stuff on the other end of the world causes to the insurance industry, you would think, if they could get off of our addiction to fossil fuel, and we would be able to not pollute the environment and cause these problems, that they would go to that. What are you guys? What are your thoughts on that?
You want to answer? Well, I don't know, what they have out there. This is, quite a bit off of the topic of what we're talking about, but.
Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, that's all right.
That's all right.
And I don't really understand if they really have, something in the works that we don't know about, free energy type of thing. And I know that it would totally change the world if they did. And there would be first an economic crash, and then I think things would rebuild. And, that's my own opinion, but it can get really political. But I don't know if that's being held back, and there's technology we just don't know about yet or not. I have no idea. It's a puzzle.
Well, it's a big question, and that's always been the case in human progress. Is any kind of revolutionary idea meets a lot of resistance because, like you said, it's going to disrupt the whole establishment of power. So you got to kind of trust that good ideas, like in nature, they're going to fight and somehow succeed. But I have a quote on my wall from Mark Twain that says, "A man with a new idea is a crank until the idea succeeds." So
he has so many great sayings.
Yeah. But that's why you look at some of the ideas. Like I'm sure you've heard of Nikola Tesla. He developed so much, but some of his ideas for free energy. He predicted we'd be having free energy by now.
Yeah, we'd be grabbing it from the sky. Yeah.
Right, but they never materialized because you can't put a meter on free energy. So it's hard. It's hard to know. I mean,
the thought, it's just with like the oil industry. And when it all boils down to it, everybody, the powers that be, it's money.
Right.
Everybody wants money. So you're disrupting one industry, the oil industry. But like the internet industry is pretty massive too. And I'm like thinking all the billions of dollars in damage that these hurricanes cause and typhoons cause. If there's a way to mitigate that and lower it, that, they would kind of want to go to that, so kind of interesting conundrum.
Well, it's kind of interesting to think. We think we can manipulate the weather, but there are such vast forces. I don't know if in a way, we're fortunate now that we can see these things ahead of time and try and avoid, the disasters, try and move people out and get ready, hunker down. Just think about how fortunate we are to be able to, see on satellites, weather satellites, a storm's coming and, we can move out of the way. Where in the past, they were just
100 years ago, they had no idea. It would just hit.
Right.
Yeah.
Massive tragedies. If you look at some of the tragedies through history, some of the storms, we're talking a loss of hundreds of thousands of lives. So.
Right. Yep.
Like Galveston. Anyway,
Right.
I appreciate the call. I appreciate you taking my call. Appreciate your time. Great show, Martin.
All right.
Hey,
thank you.
Todd, let me ask you before you head out. Todd, let me ask you real quick.
Sure.
You ever hear of the Cohoke light down in West Point?
The Cohoke light?
Yeah, down in West Point, Virginia.
No, I can't say that, but I live about 30 minutes away from West Point, so I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, check that out, because I actually went down there and did a whole field study down there, and there's one of those weird lights down there people have seen there, and we got some really cool images down there. It's a mysterious area, and the Great Dismal Swamp. You ever hear of that down there near the coast?
Oh yeah.
That's a creepy
all the time. Yep.
That's a creepy place too, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right, Todd.
Cool. Yeah, thanks. How do you spell that real quick? I want to write it down so I can look it up.
Cohoke?
Yeah,
Cohoke.
Uh-huh.
If you go to my
Cohoke.
if you go to the YouTube channel, The Living Sky, and look for Light on the Tracks, you'll see we have a trailer there for the production we're doing on that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's all. That's close to home. 30 minutes.
Yeah. There's some guys singing.
Yeah.
And they have a song about the light. It's that popular down there. So.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for
Thanks,
taking
Todd.
the call, Martin.
All right. Thanks
Thank
a
you,
lot.
sir.
Yeah. All right. So we have the line open. If anyone else would like to give a call, let me ask this other question. And I think we kind of answered this. Do you think it's possible that the orb phenomena is some sort of life form opposed to the nuts and bolts looking craft?
Absolutely. I think if you look, I did a compilation of some orb videos on the YouTube channel, The Living Sky. I think, if you think of, again, the invertebrates have a whole different life cycle than what we're used to. They reproduce in many different ways, and if there are organisms in the atmosphere, they're going to drop tons of eggs that turn into these kind of miniature sort of larval forms, and we might see them moving around like these swarms of orbs. And if you look at some of the swarms of orbs that people have seen, a lot of them, you got to be skeptical. A lot of them look like dust particles that are caught. They're artifacts of the camera. But some of them you look at and then you go, these things are moving around. They're interacting with people. And so, I think that some of those may be alive now.
Wow.
How do you capture one?
Right.
Yeah. And it's like capturing a jellyfish. It's going to go poof. It's going to disappear. So how do you capture one?
I think I remember something about an orb in a backyard where it sort of like attacked this little girl. I don't know if you ever heard that whole story.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but anyway, we have a caller on the line.
Okay.
Caller, your first name, where are you calling from?
Brian from Frederick, Maryland.
Hi, Brian. Welcome to the
Hi,
show.
Brian.
How you doing? Martin, my guy. How you doing?
All right. How are you? You have a question for Scott?
I'm not upset. I do. I got a couple questions. Okay, now, with the Rendlesham Forest thing, with the eyeball that it was like a red eyeball that Colonel Holt said he saw. Could you think that could have been like a living UFO type of deal?
I do.
And also the space phenomena too that the cable guy recorded from the FTS footage. like they look like little sparks flying around or whatever.
That's right.
And what about the space fireflies phenomenon that even what's the guy that I can't remember his name, but from the 50s.
John Glenn.
No, that before John Glenn. The contactee dude. He reported it first, and then John Glenn, or no, you know what I'm talking about? The guy. Fuck, I can't remember. Oh, my fault. I can't remember his name.
George Adamski? Is that who you're talking about?
Yeah, Adamski. Yeah. There
Okay.
You go.
I didn't know he had seen those kind of things. That's interesting.
Yeah, he wrote it in this book, and then they actually reported it from the Gemini, and then also
That's right.
how about from the tether footage? You know how they slowed it down and they showed the it looked like organisms in a fishbowl. I mean, for real.
Exactly. Isn't that mind-boggling stuff? Isn't it?
Yeah. So like all that could just be living stuff. And then what about the space squid? Like is that something that could be the same thing too?
The space what?
The space squid phenomenon.
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. If you start looking and saying, well, what if, and you start looking, there's a ton of evidence out there. It sounds like you're familiar with a lot of it. And you start looking at it.
I'm into it.
Yeah. Well, if you start looking at it like that. So that's the thing. I mean, you've seen that there's a lot of it out there. I would like to get up there and actually, get a good close look. Even if we just put a net outside the space station, see if you can catch something out there,
Right.
Yeah. But that's the thing. I think all we got to do is get people's mind around the idea that these actually might be living things, and then start looking at them, looking for them like that.
I think it was on The Greatest Story Ever Denied. They said that it was an astronaut. He said that they thought that there was actual living critters out there. That's a quote from him.
That's right, Scott Carpenter. That's right. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. He said that a couple different times on a couple different occasions, and it's interesting because he said that right after John Glenn flew for the first time. He said that they thought that they might be living critters, and then they did a 50-year anniversary production on John Glenn's Friendship 7 flight, and he was still talking about it. And he said that all the best he said all the best scientific all the best scientific minds of the time were thinking about it, that there might be living creatures up there. Now, I don't know if they did any study about that. I can't find any evidence that they did any further study on that direction, which seems to me
it was suppressed, if anything.
It was a what?
I said it would be suppressed, if anything. I mean, like they would let that get out.
Well, why do you think they would suppress that?
Why do I think they would suppress that? Because, I mean, how would they have evolved up there? I mean, theory of evolution, all that stuff.
Well, I wonder about that. I mean, I part of me thinks, well, either they do know about it and they're not telling anybody, or they don't know about it. They just haven't looked in that area.
Come from nowhere.
Well, that's the possibility. Where do they come from? If you think, they might be coming into the atmosphere all the time, and we only see them, when they blossom in the warm, moist air. I mean, they might be, like seeding the atmosphere from vast regions of space as we travel through these clouds of material. But
I heard you mention about the ice, the water that was coming into the atmosphere. I heard about that too. Like, what is that?
Right. Well, one scientist found out, he started looking at the atmosphere and finding that there were these blobs of water that were coming into the atmosphere. And his name was Louis Frank. I think he was at the University of Iowa. And he said, well, these might be watery comets that are hitting the atmosphere, mini comets. He said there were these house-sized comets that are hitting the atmosphere, and they're hitting the atmosphere, not just occasionally, but he said thousands of times a day. And a lot of scientists said, oh, you're crazy, you're nuts. It was incredible, the controversy that this guy stirred up. And they said, well, let's go test it. And they actually went and looked, and they found out that there are indeed these blobs, these things of water hitting the atmosphere, boom, 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 all the time. Now, are all those mini comets, are they all sterile, or do some of them contain organic matter? And if some of them contain organic matter, do they possibly contain, some kind of cysts or some kind of spores of some other kind of organisms that actually are hitting the earth all the time? I don't know. These are questions to explore.
Hey, thank you for your call.
Yeah, mind blowing.
You guys have a
good one.
Yeah, thanks for your questions. That's great stuff.
All right.
Thanks, man.
All right.
Yeah, take care.
Uh, one of the main things I thought of, Scott, when we first started talking is, most of the time people talk about, UFOs shooting off at an incredible speed, and so that would take all of the organic, your thoughts of a living creature kind of out of the picture, wouldn't it?
No, as a matter of fact, if you think about how these organisms move, it makes perfect sense the way some of the UFOs behave. I actually went and identified 10 different ways that UFOs parallel marine invertebrates, and one of them is in how they move. How they propel themselves. Again, we'll just divide it into two different areas of the jellyfish and the squid. An Australian Air Force colonel did an analysis of how jellyfish move. And he found out that they actually produce with a small flex of their muscle. They're like a ring of muscle with a small flex of their muscle. They produce a vortex, and they actually ride on that vortex. So they flex and then ride that vortex away. So they can actually float virtually motionless and all of a sudden just go poof, and then they're gone. And that seems to parallel a lot of the behavior that people report with disc-shaped UFOs. They actually seem to pulse. A lot of them report that they pulse. They change shape as they move. In fact, that's why you see sometimes people report different shapes. Some people say, oh, it's like a circle. Some people say it was like a curve. But they're actually seeing different aspects of the same object, but they're reporting different shapes. The jellyfish can actually hover motionlessly. We tend to think of a jellyfish as just very passive organisms, just sort of, move around wherever the waves take them. But they're actually really good swimmers. The mature ones are very good swimmers. They ride currents, and they can actually, they surf through the currents, and they can actually change their direction with that muscular pulsing and create their own vortexes and move. If you look at some of the more interesting UFO videos, you can actually see some of these discs seem to, they kind of ride the wind, and they kind of will move, and they'll go back, and then they'll kind of catch the wind like a sail. They'll open themselves up and catch the wind and zip, and then they kind of tack against it and come back. It's fascinating stuff. Now, squid, on the other hand, they can produce within themselves different chemicals that change their buoyancy, so they can move up and down and hover in different aspects. But within their bodies, they actually have these chambers that are like living jets. So they squeeze, and then they produce these jets that just let them go zipping away. And that's how we people have often reported the cigar-shaped things. They tend to hover and move slowly, and then all of a sudden they go, and they're just gone quicker than you can even imagine. So it's very much, it's almost like a affirmation of the parallels with the organisms rather than a refutation.
But the difference is here we're talking fluid compared to an atmosphere, and then if we're talking upper atmosphere, we're talking very thin. So they don't really have the matter to propel them, as far as I can see.
Well, that's where again it's that perception of our atmosphere as being insubstantial, when really there's a huge amount of force and energy. There's a huge amount of gas and vapor within the atmosphere. So there's a lot for them to work with. It's just the fact that we move through it, we don't think of it as something substantial. But if you think of the different pressures that are involved and the amount of, you ought to check sometime on the amount of energy and the amount of water that's like in one thundercloud. It's just incredible, the amount of material that's above our heads. It's not like it's all empty. It's full of, energy and minerals and water vapor and other gases. And mostly nitrogen. But it's a huge and it's a very substantial environment for them to move around in.
But you got to think about mass and gravity. Where does all this play into how something can move about and stay up in the atmosphere, floating day in and day out?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, like I said, it's a hypothesis, and the ideal to me would be to get near some of these sprites and see if you could possibly tag one and see where does it go, where does it move, how does it move through the atmosphere, does it persist, does it keep going? Another thing that would be great is to actually get there's a chemical that actually reveals the presence of DNA, which it's the building block of all life that we know of. And it would be interesting to me to go to some of these areas where these objects are seen and douse the atmosphere and see if there is any DNA that's revealed there. It's a big question, but if you think, I didn't want to do it here because I have my computer in front of me. I don't want to do it. But if you take a glass of water, just to give you an idea of the amount of energy in the atmosphere, the amount of substance in the atmosphere, and if you put a piece of cardboard on top of the water, and then if you turn the glass upside down, and I'm not going to do it here
full glass. Yeah.
Right, full glass.
Yeah.
It won't fall. And the reason is the pressure of the atmosphere is pushing up on the bottom of that piece of board more than the force of the water is pushing down. So that's the kind of forces in the atmosphere that we're talking about. Now, if you're seeing organisms that can use their bodies to propel themselves with some kind of vortex, you might find actual tracks and traces of them. And I don't know if you remember what Terence Meaden, are you familiar with his theories on crop circles? He came up with the idea that there had to be some kind of weather phenomena called a plasma vortex, something that came down and quickly went and swirled the plant material. Now, England is in a unique environmental spot with the Gulf Stream moving up there. They have a lot of warm water, and they have a lot of UFO phenomena moving over the British Isles. And regularly there, they see this crop circle phenomena through the summer months. And there's actually been recordings of these lighted objects moving. And as they move, it seems like they pulse, and you can see the swirls of the grain below them as they move. So that's another piece of physical evidence. It's a possibility that these things are actually pulsing, producing a vortex, and pulsing repeatedly, creating these kind of multiple circles beneath them.
Okay, I'm going to ask you kind of a strange question. I don't know if I've asked anyone this question before.
Go ahead.
And if you were to critique the whole thing, what's your best skeptical argument against this? Against your thoughts?
Against my own hypothesis?
Against your own hypothesis, yes.
Well, you believe me, Martin, it's a good question because I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think there was something to it. I mean, really, I got nothing to gain from this. And I wouldn't be doing it if I hadn't asked myself that question repeatedly. I mean, I've said, okay, what if there was this, wouldn't we see this? And wouldn't we? And to be honest, my biggest, and I don't know if it's a case of where it's, a self-reinforcing feedback loop. I find a justification for my own doubts. But, the big question is, why don't we see the bodies more often? And now, are you familiar with the phenomenon of angel hair, right?
Are you talking about the one UFO where it covered the trees? They called it something like that.
Right, and it's not just one. Yeah, it's repeatedly it's been reported. Angel hair, these kind of trailing tentacles beneath the UFOs as they go by. They leave this stuff, and it kind of sheds off them as they go by. Well, the problem with angel hair is that it sublimates. It doesn't just evaporate. It just goes from a semi-solid, kind of a sticky, gelatinous stuff. It just goes poof and just turns into gas. It disappears. So people have tried to collect it, but it just disappears. But the few samples that they've capped and actually kept, they analyze them. They have a lot of the same chemical compounds as marine life. They have the same organic compounds. So that's a big question. Why don't we see more of them? And then there actually there have been reported cases there in Brazil. There was a case in, I think, the early 1960s of a UFO supposedly exploded, and they found these pieces of metal that came from them. and it came from it, and it was pure manganese, and it was purer than any kind of manganese that people could have produced. And I thought, well, what's up with that? And then I started looking at jellyfish. As a matter of fact, NASA did a study into jellyfish in space, where they took a bunch of jellyfish up there to see how they would orient in space.
Really?
Because yes,
Like
they
on-
actually took it
Like
on the shuttle.
inside of the space station or something?
They took it up in the shuttle. Yeah.
Wow.
Uh,
Oh, in the
and
shuttle.
they
Uh-huh.
right, and they had a doctor from the university, the Virginia University of Medicine, conducted this experiment because they found the orienting system of jellyfish was similar to the human system. We have these little particles called statoliths. They're little minerals in our ears that help us orient to gravity, to the Earth's gravitational field. And jellyfish have similar organisms around the ring of their body. They're little statoliths instead of statocysts. There's these little organisms, and they found that when they brought them into space and caused them to mature, that the jellyfish could orient to gravity even though they were in space, and they also matured normally. Now, I don't know why NASA was studying jellyfish in space, but the statoliths, which is lith is a stone, the statoliths, were actually made of different minerals, and one of the minerals is manganese. So was this proof that that thing was a giant jellyfish dropping its statoliths? I don't know, but it seems to. So, and otherwise, I think there's a lot to be said for the theory, but the only, I'm not a believer. I'm proposing that this is a hypothesis that needs to be studied. And I think that the best way to study it is through long-term observation. And that's one of the challenges that we face is, when we go out and look for UFOs, we want to sit there and look up in the sky, and after an hour or so, everybody's looking at their watches or their phones. But these things happen not on a regular schedule. They might happen like any kind of natural event, only occasionally, maybe seasonally, cyclically. And to really to learn more about this phenomenon, we're going to have to commit to studying it on a long-term, wide-scale basis, go to different locations and set up monitoring equipment that'll, let us look not only at visible light, but in the infrared and ultraviolet spectrum, and commit to doing this over a long period of time. But that's going to be a substantial undertaking.
Another question I have for you. So if you're taking a flight and you're up at 30,000 feet, it's something like, 14 below outside at 30,000 feet. And you would think that if there are organisms and we're not seeing them, that they would have to be up higher than that. So, and then maybe occasionally come down.
Yeah, there's different regions of the atmosphere. From what I understand, there's a region that's very cold, and then above that, it gets very hot again. So,
really?
We're not talking.
Okay.
Yeah, we're not talking about static environments. We're talking about these. Things are constantly moving, and there's little areas of opportunity where the resources are just right for things to flourish, to grow. One of the questions that's foremost in my mind is most of the sightings that the astronauts have had and the recordings that they've had of these objects have been right at dawn. And, we got this region, and again, that's a perfect habitat edge of dawn that moves around the planet. It's moving around the planet all the time, this region of dawn. And it's where, the harsh light meets the cold darkness. So right at that region, you got an area of moderation. Now, what if you're something that's not tied to the surface and you can move through that region? This is where we've seen a lot of those objects. In fact, that STS-75 with the tether, that took place. The shuttle was in nighttime, and they saw it as they were looking towards dawn. Now, is it because the objects are only visible in that extreme lighting condition, or is there actually a swarming of objects around that edge effect, that habitat where the dawn exists in the atmosphere? And I think that'd be a prime region for study if we put something up there to actually observe right at that dawn region.
Now, did you ever hear of the UFO sighting in Space Lab back in 1974 or something like that?
No, tell me about that.
Well, I've actually spoken to the astronaut. Boy, his name's slipping my mind. And he recently passed away. He was the fourth man on the moon. Just can't get his name out. I'll think of it in a minute. But anyway, it was a very, very large object, but it was sort of organic looking. That's why I brought that up. But he would not talk about it. He just didn't want to talk about it when I asked him if he would.
Interesting. Why do you think? Was he afraid of being called
it's-
crazy? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously.
Yeah.
But I hate that when I forget someone's name. Great guy, too.
Yeah.
Anyway, as far as, people reporting things that they may think or are organic, I wanted to tell you this quick story of Denise Stoner. She was on the show, I don't know, maybe three years ago or so. And
Okay.
she was telling a story about, she believes that she was abducted, and her whole family was actually involved in this because they were driving in a car, and the car all of a sudden lost control, and next thing she knows, she's on this craft, according to her. And the thing that, the reason I'm bringing this up is she said it was alive. She said this thing was
Wow.
alive. And,
Wow.
have you ever heard of people talk about such things like that?
Well, yeah, this is, I know this topic sounds weird, but it gets even weirder still. I mean,
Okay, I'm
Yeah.
ready. I'm ready to go there.
well, you think, throughout history, other cultures have talked about these beings coming down from the sky. In fact, we've seen the one artifact that's kind of lasted throughout history in almost every continent, are the pyramids. And cultures build these. They put a lot of energy into building these things to reach up to something that was coming down. Now, why were they doing that? What were they? Gods? Were they some kind of bringer of abundance? Were they somehow bringing rain and minerals and seeds, making the land fertile or something? And why were they putting all this energy into reaching up to the sky? Now, if you think, you read, at first I used to discount, and this gets into pretty weird stuff. I used to discount a lot of stories about abductees and, the people talking about the experiments on, the people's, seed cells and stuff. And then you wonder, you go, well, who knows? Maybe there is something to it, but I don't even know about that. I think one of the questions you have to ask yourself is, what evidence do we have? And that's really, you have to hold this to since it is something that's kind of, unsubstantiated at this point. It's very much on the fringe. I think we have to look at the highest standards of evidence. And, as believable as somebody might be, we know the fallibility of human memory. And you just have to wonder now, to me, it sounds like maybe she was taken by something that was alive, but who knows? I think that if there are these things up there, like any other form of wildlife, you might have a whole range of ones that are, benign. They could care less what we do. You might have some that are hostile, that might actually prey on us and on our livestock. And you might have ones that may actually benefit us in some ways we might even not even know. So, it's kind of how it comes full circle. Even though they might not be aliens and rocket ships, they might be somehow visitors.
All right, I want to revisit that because I want to ask you something about that. But we have a caller on the line. Caller,
Great.
your first name and where are you calling from?
Hey, Martin, it's Bobby from North Carolina.
Hey, Bobby is a regular, and we met down in North Carolina. How's everything holding out down there? You never were
Good.
You weren't hit. Your area was not hit by the hurricane.
Actually, it came right over us. There's a lot of places out here still without power because of all the trees. We only had 40, 50 mile an hour gusts, but a lot of trees came down taking out power. But I only lost power for maybe 30, 40 minutes, and then the cable was out for 2 days, and the phone service was actually out for 2 days, which is, that was rough. But the reason I'm calling is, I don't know if he's aware, there's a guy named Trevor James Constable who wrote a book called The Cosmic Pulse of Life.
Absolutely.
The revolutionary biological power behind UFOs. He's basically exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. That's like I said, this is not my, I was not the first person to think of this. One of the things with Trevor James Constable is that he, what I'm saying is that these things are perfectly natural within the realm of science that we know of right now. If we look at the capabilities of invertebrates that we know right now, these things are a possibility. Well, I loved hearing his stories, but I think he went off a little bit when he started talking about them being some kind of unknown energy beings. And then he started speculating about the nature of, them being some kind of pure energy or something. And what I'm saying is that they could be very explainable in terms of what we already know about marine invertebrate biology at this point. But there was Trevor James. Yeah, they live in the sky, he wrote. And then there was Ivan Sanderson, wrote a book called Uninvited Visitors. And as I mentioned, Kenneth Arnold.
There was a guy, I don't know if it was in the 50s or 60s, who took infrared pictures in the desert, I remember.
That was Trevor James Constable. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Those are cool looking pictures, aren't they?
I couldn't find any online recently, but that was nuts.
Yeah,
I've actually seen multiple UFOs. I'm one of those weird people that just happens to look up and see stuff.
Yeah.
I've seen different things, and I've not yet to see a jellyfish though, but I've seen blobs of light.
Now, did you feel like we were talking earlier about feeling like something was watching you and looking up and seeing it, or?
At least 3 of the times I happened to look right directly at it, and one of the times my son was earlier this year. There was a report where some aircraft were talking to a tower out Midwest, and they actually saw a white cylinder go overhead, and one plane was talking to another plane. Well, I've seen that object in North Carolina twice.
Unbelievable.
And one of the times I was watching it, it was perfectly still. It looked like a white cigarette. I mean, it had just a white glow. And my son was 5 feet away. I was throwing grass seed, and I told my son, look over there over the treetops, and he could not see it. And the minute I took my eyes away from him and pointed back at it, it was gone. But I mean, the whole time I was something to look at it, he could not see it, and I could see it.
Wow. That's so weird.
Anyways, thanks. Good show. I'm enjoying it. Thank you, Martin.
Bobby, do you ever get out to see the Brown Mountain Lights out there in western North Carolina?
No, I'd like to sometime. That's probably about 3 or 4 hours away, so it's not too bad. But
yeah, that's worth going to. It's a very creepy, very cool experience. And if you're lucky, you go there in like fall, like this time of year, you might get a chance.
I get creeped out in the backyard in the dark.
You don't want to go to this place then, because it's like it's a big gorge. And it's like, you're out there and the wind's blowing and there's nobody around and you're like, oh, man. So,
I'll have to check it out. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Bobby.
I was trying to think who I had. I had someone talking about that. Oh, Maddie Beckerman did a movie about the Brown Mountain Lights.
No kidding.
Yeah, it was fascinating. So have you actually visited and check that out?
Yes, I have. That was very fascinating. It was, the folks we were talking to, everybody down there has a story about the lights. And that's what's fascinating about these phenomena is you go to these areas and you ask people about these things and people have seen them. And they have some great stories about, the way the lights interacted with people. And there's actually there's a great story down there. Some folks set up an observation tower there in the late 1960s to watch the lights.
Wow. And
they saw the lights coming out of like fissures in the ground. And the lights came up and the guys were up in the top and they actually swarmed the guys in the observation booth in the platform up there. And most of them felt faint. And one guy actually passed out. So, but when we went down there, it was weird. It was early in the season. And we saw some like very faint bluish kind of lights that were in crevices and in trees, but we didn't see any of the big lights moving, across the sky or down through the forests and stuff. But people say that the lights seem to come out of the side of the hill, go down to the river that's down below, and then come back up the hill. But those are something that are seen regularly there.
People have speculated plasma, I think, and there's also a high level of copper in that area. And
Interesting.
yeah, and I don't know if that's, I mean, it could be something natural. I mean,
Yeah.
who knows?
Yeah. Well, that's why I said the only way to find out about these things is to look closer. Now, there is a phenomena in we actually, like I said, we went down to this place in Virginia called West Point, where they had this light they call the Cohoke light that people have seen for generations. And we went out there with low light cameras and infrared cameras, and I went out there over the course of a year, and we got some really cool footage. But it was frustrating because you realize, you're not going to be there all the time. And if they are some kind of wildlife, John Keel in some of his UFO books wrote that the UFOs they don't want to be seen by people. They go away from where people are, which if you were an organism, that would probably be pretty smart. I mean, we don't step on a red anthill, and these organisms aren't going to come near a city. So if you're going to be out there making noise and bustling around, shining lights, there's a good chance that if they are some kind of organism, they're not going to come out. But even so, we got some really interesting footage, but it showed the challenge to me of trying to do some kind of field study, and we'll have to do it over a long term.
Getting back to possible jellyfish-like creatures living in the sky.
Okay.
Let's talk about intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
I think of a jellyfish as really not too intelligent.
Right.
But do you think that these things have intelligence?
Well, it depends on how we define intelligence. I mean, as humans, we define intelligence as thinking like humans and solving human problems. But if you look at invertebrates and some of the challenges of life that they solve, one could argue that they do have their own form of intelligence. I mean, they reproduce in many different ways to increase the odds that they're going to continue to have their DNA succeed. They actually move through different habitats. They can go into a static state, and when conditions are adverse, some jellyfish can actually regress in their maturity, and some people have said that's some kind of immortality. They seem to go back to a previous form of their life, and then they mature again when conditions are right. So we have to think. They have a different nervous system than we do. They don't build things, but then they use the minerals in their environment to conduct their lives. We are used to looking at things with our two eyes, and we perceive the world with our stereoscopic vision. Jellyfish can have, multiple eyes, maybe 27 eyes around the rim of their body. How are they perceiving the world? I don't know if we can perceive that. If we can even think of how they're perceiving the world. In fact, if you look at some UFO videos, like I said, there's some where it looks like they're looking down at us as much as we're looking up at them. It's a little bit frightening to think, what are they seeing when they look down at us?
Right. We have a caller just called in. Caller, your first name, where are you calling from?
It's Brian again from Frederick, Maryland.
Brian,
Brian, wait a minute. You have to get a new phone before you call back.
I do.
I'm just giving you a hard time.
He's busting your chops.
I know. But I was just thinking, like, when I was looking at the some footage and stuff, they call it the Dropa craft or whatever, and it was kind of pulsating like squids pulsate. You know how they change color all the time?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. People describe UFOs as having colors like they can't describe, and these organisms actually make their own kind of color. If you look at some of the bioluminescent organisms, the displays of light they have are just like mind-boggling. It's amazing.
You just opened me up to like a whole new world.
I'm glad I could do it. And it starts, and the thing is, it makes scientific sense. I mean, we're not.
It does. It really does.
I mean, that's the most amazing thing is life itself, and nature is like a composer. It gets a theme and it starts spinning variations on a successful theme. Well, these organisms are some of the most successful organisms in the oceans, and so why wouldn't we see them in the atmosphere? And it seems like we do. So it's an interesting avenue for further study. Yeah, I'm glad you think so.
I'm still.
Heck yeah. Well, sorry, I didn't mean to take up your time again. It just popped in my head. I was like, I gotta say it.
No,
Right.
check it out. I mean, if you're interested, start looking at like videos of squid and jellyfish, and what they can do is amazing.
I love nature, man. I watch all those type of shows,
Yeah.
man, and it makes a lot of sense because they're constantly pulsating.
Yeah, yeah. And just like a lot of people report UFOs, and a lot of the footage shows is that pulsing movement.
That pulsating light coming from it just constantly.
Right.
Well,
Right.
I think he's out of signal. All right. Well, thanks for the
No,
call, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
So yeah, another thing, I'm still having a hard time with the buoyancy, what keeps something up in the air, unless
Right.
it somehow can make its own helium or something like that.
Right. Well, let me just say, I don't know. There's an organism called the Luminous flying squid. Okay, this is a known. That's the name. That's the common name. It's not the scientific name.
Okay.
They know that this organism, this squid, jets out of the water, and it flies above the surface of the water for over a mile. It's been observed for over a mile. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And it
Super
produces its own
squid.
light.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, that's the thing is that we know that there are giant squid in the oceans that we can't perceive. I mean, they're too smart. They stay away from humans. We found some of the giant squid, but then they're saying what they're colossal squid, mega huge colossal squid. But there have been reported stories of a sailor waking up, and he looks up in the rigging of his craft, and there's a giant squid caught in the rigging of the craft. Now, how did it get snared there? It must have been flying through the air, jumping, through the air above his craft, and it got snagged there. So, we hear reports. I don't know if you ever heard of the mystery rockets over Sweden going into.
Yeah, the ghost rockets.
Right, the ghost rockets going
Yeah.
in and out of the fjords over in Sweden.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's one of the earliest UFO photographs is over a Swedish harbor. And it's this object hovering over the harbor. You can see its shadow down on the water. And it looks, the outline, it's not a great photograph. It's from 1907. But the outline of it looks just like a squid. So who's to say that those aren't migrating into the warmer waters in summer months and where the fish are more numerous, and then migrating out when the weather changes. And you've heard about those ghost rockets and ghost submarines, how they confounded the defense agencies, because these objects would be under the water moving around, and they think they were Soviet submarines, but they could never get close to them. And the same things, they go through the atmosphere into the water, and then they come back out and go away. So are we ever going to be able to catch one? I don't know. Are we going to be able to tag one? That would be great. But I think we might be able to see one. I mean, I know there have been a lot of sightings of, in fact, one of the next videos I want to do is about the type of squid-like objects that have been recorded. The thing about them is they're really fast, and they're very smart. Squid have some of the largest nerves in the animal kingdom and the largest eye that we know of.
Oh, I know. Basketball. Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey, we are out of time. I can't believe it went by so fast.
Oh, gosh, Martin.
All right. So, hey, thanks so much. Interesting. I don't know if I buy it all, but I think it's interesting, and you present it very well.
I would ask you to take a look on our DVD, Not Alone. The extras on them are the raw NASA footage.
Uh-huh.
And I've had a lot of people, it's an out there concept. I've had a lot of people say, I don't get this. But if you just let that footage play, just put it on in the background and look at it, it's beyond words. You're going to be like, what the heck is that? And it starts to make sense when you actually look at the footage.
All right. Hey, thanks so much, Scott. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks, Martin, and thank you for having me on.
All right. Take care. All right, everyone. So that's it for the show. Thanks so much for listening. And we will be back next week. We have Nick Redfern on, and we'll be back next week. And thanks again for listening. And I want to thank the people that help out with the show, Alejandro Rojas, our guest, Scott Deschaine, and Evan in the background, and Keith over at Dark Matter Digital Network, and Race over at KGRA Radio. Thank them all. And so that's it, everyone. So thanks so much. And remember to keep your eyes to the sky.